For joining us today. So it's the first workshop we have of winter quarter in the new year. So happy new year, everybody. Today we have Matt Youngquist joining us, who is the founder and chief consultant at Career Horizons, which is kind of a career and outplacement consulting firm. When we've been lucky enough to have Matt come over the last few years and give career development topics on a wide range of topics. Today, he's going to focus on interviewing. So he's going to start off by giving us kind of a brief overview of what he's seen in the job market. And then we'll segue into getting some tips on interviewing, what's new, what's changed, what stayed the same. And then at the end, like I said, we'll have about 15 minutes for Q&A where you can unmute yourself, ask Matt questions, or if you like, you can drop your questions in the chat and we will ask Matt those questions on your behalf. So that being said, welcome, Matt, and thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Justin, very much, and the rest of the team there. Yeah, I'm excited to share some thoughts on this. I will be taking us, of course, through some slides on the subject, and I'm going to have Justin distribute all these slides right after the session. So you will have some note. You're welcome to take notes, but you will have a pretty thorough slide deck coming your way. On that note, let's see if I can share my screen so you can see these marvelous slides. And is that coming through where you can see me talking still and
yes.
See the slides? Okay. Yeah, so just to add a little bit to what Justin said, I fell into the field of career coaching about 30 years ago. I had no idea what it was. I had no intention of doing this my whole life, but like many college graduates, when I got out in the real world, I went to University of Washington and I just needed a job. And what hit me was, even though I was a pretty good student, when I got out in the job market, I go, I have no idea what I'm doing. Schools are doing a lot better than they used to, but most people don't get a lot of training on job hunting and career management and these critical topics. So I got out there, bumbled around, and eventually, through a friend of a friend, ended up in a startup that was doing sort of executive career coaching and such things. And I just came in as like a receptionist and admin helper. But I really fell in love with it because I think not only, again, is it a skill set that just has such profound implications in people's lives, the ability to go out and compete for jobs and have a stable living. But at the time I got into it, that's when really technology transformed the whole landscape, the internet, all these websites, social media. So all these years, I spend my days just coaching people through all facets of the job hunting process. And one of them that I always love talking about is interviewing, because I think it is sort of the forgotten skill set of job hunting. And what I mean by that is the vast majority of people I see out there fixate on, I got to get my resume better. There's something wrong with my resume and I need to find more leads. And in some cases, they spend months trying to get a couple good interviews. And then amazingly, a lot of them I just see do like zero preparation or just the absolute basics. And I kind of pull my hair out and go, you worked so hard to get this sales opportunity. Take it more seriously, put some time in, out hustle your competition. So again, I think it's a lot of people just don't know what they can do to prepare effectively and kind of give themselves an edge. So that's what we're going to be talking about. And I'm going to try to talk about some of the classic techniques to get better at interviewing and, some of the newfangled things in light of COVID and Zoom interviews and all the new methods that companies are using. Okay. So let's start. Justin asked me to give just a quick overview of what's going on in the job market. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that it's pretty good right now. We keep hearing, the phrases like labor shortage and things like that. Admittedly, this idea that all these jobs are going unfilled, a lot of that is at more the hourly retail restaurant end, where a lot of people have just decided, it's not worth working that hard for that amount of money. So it's not like, Microsoft and places are sitting around like, I will hire any warm body that walks through the door. But at the same time, it's good. I mean, it's historically better than average. So I think until things change, knock, knock, most of you, if you're going to look for a job soon, are going to be walking into a pretty good market. Okay. But I'd never, as I say there, I never underestimate it. You want to make a real serious effort at it. Another thing, most companies are under a lot of stress right now, present company included. And and I think candidates can win some extra credit and some brownie points if they just have a good attitude. In other words, rather than showing up in an interview and demanding and where's my job, or kind of giving them attitude, just realizing these companies are under a lot of stress. And if they get someone who really seems willing to work, flexible, oh, you need me to work remotely or hybrid or on site, I mean, that goes a long way. So just have a little, it's not that you shouldn't watch out for your own interests, but have a little compassion and empathy that these companies and these managers are, again, under incredible stress right now. And if you seem like an easy to get along with person, they're going to appreciate that. So of course, again, you got to be really adaptable, because whatever job you walk into might change tomorrow, and they might say, oops, now we got to do it from home or do this and that. And that's just, we're all in that bucket right now until things kind of stabilize with COVID. This isn't new, but I'll just reinforce, if you haven't heard this enough already, that one of the biggest misconceptions of job hunting is that most jobs are hired by sending in a resume to an online advertisement. At most, it's like 20 or 30%. The vast majority of jobs that you never hear about are your friends and others who are getting hired under the radar through the grapevine, friends and places, friends of friends, referrals. So one of the biggest things I had to learn, because I'm pretty introverted, I didn't initially like networking and asking for help, but I had to get over that in a hurry, because I realized quickly, if you just sit there sending resumes out all day, it's not that you can't get a job, but that's the most competitive way to do it. You've got to be really qualified on paper. And the other sad thing is, a lot of the jobs posted out there are not real. They're already promised to somebody else or an internal candidate, but legally bigger companies have to post jobs regardless. So a lot of people don't realize it's not a fair fight. When you see 20 jobs out there, it's not like everyone applying has an equal chance. So keep doing that and looking at sites like LinkedIn, Indeed, and stuff to find jobs, but don't make that your only activity. Try to put at least half your time into, who do I know? Can I get the word out to them? Can I see if they know people that can introduce me? Again, that is the most reliable way to generate interviews and get leads. Salary's interesting. I mean, with inflation being what it is and whatnot, yeah, I mean, salaries are slowly creeping up, not as fast as inflation. And so I guess I would just say it's really going to depend on what each of you do for a living and how much experience you have. But I would say in general, you can negotiate a little more right now than in years past. So if you do get a job offer and it's not, everything you want, generally, if you ask nicely and work with them and say, hey, this looks great, I'm really excited, any chance we could bump it up to here? Or could we get creative and add an extra week of vacation or whatever? You're going to have a little more leverage right now, again, because the economy is pretty decent and supply and demand is what it is. So again, don't be greedy and just throw out some crazy number thinking they have to meet it. But if you are on the fence, should I push back a little, ask for a little more, you'll probably find companies a little more receptive right now than they would be, in other years. If you don't already know this, most people do by now, there is no magic number that anyone should get paid or that this job is worth X. You have to kind of try to figure out the current market trend by going to sites like Glassdoor, payscale.com, salary.com, and you can sort of triangulate, what are each of those sites telling you? And that might get you to within like a $10,000 or $20,000 range. You're never going to have a perfect number because every job is different. But if you're totally lost on what to ask for, again, those sites would be the ones I would check out. And then last but not least, one of my things, Justin's probably sick of me saying this, but I just, if there's one thing I've learned in all the years, or one thing I'm begging people to understand is if we're all in the Seattle area, we are sitting in an ocean of opportunity, and not everyone sees that. There's over 140,000 companies in the greater Seattle area, if you can believe it. When I ask most people to guess before I tell them that answer, most people guess like 5,000 or 10,000, but there's 140,000. So I don't know each of your situations, but I can promise you that if you have been job hunting and it's not going all that well, one of the smartest things you can do is wean yourself off the top 10 or 20 companies, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Starbucks, Costco, like everyone's trying to get in these 10 or 20 companies. And there's over 100,000 others that could need you and actually be great places to work. So I'm going to take a really quick detour before we get back to interviewing. And I just want to show you one of my favorite tricks on LinkedIn that very few people seem to be aware of. Okay. So if I jump over here to LinkedIn, I'm assuming most of you are familiar with LinkedIn and probably on it have a profile. So, most people know the basics of looking up jobs on LinkedIn, looking up people on LinkedIn, but when almost nobody notices is you can run a search. And weirdly, I would just run a blank search in the top box. And you'll notice on the toolbar, there's a companies option that very few people seem to pay attention to. If I click that, it brings up a menu where I can define the kinds of companies I might be interested in. So I can say Seattle area, Greater Seattle. Let's say you want to work for a tech company. I could go in and pick some tech company options as far as industry. Okay. And it says, oh my gosh, there's 14,000 tech companies in Seattle. Then I could put in company size. If I wanted a bigger or smaller company, I could sort of pick some choices there. Okay, that gets me down to 4,000. And last but not least, if there was a really specific kind of company, cloud or SaaS or healthcare or whatever you're into, you can actually go back up, add a word, and so it'll narrow it down to only those companies that say that word in their description. So as example, I have lots of clients come to me who say, oh, I want to work for a cloud company. And I'll say, well, where have you applied? And of course, they all say Microsoft, Google, Amazon. And I'll go, what about the other 812 in town? And they're just blown away. They're like, what? There's 800 others? Who are they? Go on LinkedIn, look for them, start checking them out. So that LinkedIn company tool, if you've never discovered it, it's free. There's so many cool ways you can find employers that don't know you exist and start interacting with them, reaching out to them. Again, before we get to interviewing, I'm just going to say that one of the best interviewing techniques I can give you is get more of them. And the way you get more interviews is a lot more outreach to a lot more companies than you probably are now. And that LinkedIn search is going to give you the fuel to do that. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Okay. And let me give the Seattle University, Justin or Mary Lou, or anyway, if you guys have any additional thoughts, questions about any of this stuff, don't be hesitant to unmute and butt in. So would love to hear your perspective as well, or if you think I overlooked something. Okay, so that's just kind of the state of the market, what I would say I'm seeing out there. Now let's get into the main topic here. So like we joked in the title, what's old about interviewing? What are the classic things about interviewing? I guess my main thought here is that when you get an interview, you usually have no idea if you're the most talented, the least talented, the most qualified, the least qualified. There's just no way to know that unless you have an inside friend or someone feeding you information. But what I can promise you is you can ensure you're the most prepared candidate, because the bar is so low with most people, like I said earlier, not really putting much time into getting ready. I routinely see people that would be mediocre candidates on paper get the job offers because they just out hustled and out prepared their competition. But again, I'm not sure everyone really thinks of it that way. So that I would say minimum, if you've got an interview, an hour or two, maybe more, that you should spend getting ready to ace that interview. Because if you land it, guess what? You get to put all that annoying job hunting stuff behind you and have a job and get paid. So it's worth at least a couple hours of, not more, of prep. Okay. So here's some just time-tested interview quick tips. First thing I tell people is, if you have a job description, that's your cheat sheet. It's like a take-home test. So I shouldn't have to say that, but if you're looking at a job description that asks for 15 things that they want in a candidate, there shouldn't be a single thing on there that you're not ready to talk about. I mean, if there is, shame on you. You didn't pay attention to it. So, just treat that like your test prep. Go through, look at each thing they asked for, be ready to talk about it, be ready with an example if it's the kind of thing that might ask for an example. And here's a funny little thing that I say about that, this last part. If there's anything on that job description you've either never dealt with or are rusty on, haven't dealt with it for a while, Google it and get smart about it in 20 minutes. Now, it seems silly, I know, but it's like I had someone the other day interviewing for a job with the city of Seattle, and the job description asked for something about background in cultural competency. Okay, so I asked my client, do you know what that is? And he said, well, I think it's just about diversity. Are you comfortable with diversity? And he says, yeah, I am. And I said, well, I don't know. That's a really specific phrase. Why don't we Google it? So we Googled cultural competency, and lo and behold, it deals with diversity, but it's a very specific methodology for dealing with diversity. So my point is, if my client had gone in and just started winging it and bluffing, oh yeah, I like diversity and multiculturalism, I mean, they probably would have looked at him and laughed or said, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. And so I just, as a preventative measure, Google anything you're not quite clear on and just make sure, like, let's say there's a piece of software you don't know. 15 minutes later, you could be talking all about it, the latest version. Yeah, you've never used it, but at least you know what it is and you can talk knowledgeably about it. I shouldn't have to say that, but I do see that violated by a lot of people that just kind of overlook things like that versus researching them. Okay, second thing is that interviewing really hasn't changed all that much over the decades. Most companies still ask a very pre-planned set of basic questions. On the next slide, I've got a list of the top 10 or so questions. And so my point is, let me just jump ahead real quick. If we know these questions are coming 9 out of 10 times in most interviews, the first thing someone should do is practice and be ready to answer these. I mean, these are like the price of admission. If you're not ready to answer these ones, you're not ready for anything, because these are the ones time and time and time again, companies ask in some form or another. So you could even just Google these questions, greatest weakness, greatest strengths. We won't have time for me to go through all of them, but there's, you know, 1 million terabytes of information on the web about what would good responses to these questions be. My point is, anticipate them in advance and have a really good answer to each of them. Don't walk in and not be ready for them, because we know these are the common ones probably coming most of the time. Okay. All right. So being just ready for the classics is what I'm saying here. Another thing that, again, it's basic, and every interview coach will tell you this, but you've got to have some great stories. Companies, 10 or 20 years ago said, we think the most reliable way to hire people is to ask them to give proof and tell stories of the strengths they claim to have. And I guess they believe that unless you're a pathological liar, your story is credible and it really shows you're good at it, versus saying, yes, I'm good at that, and you can't back it up. So again, you're just not ready for an interview if you haven't worked on at least 3 to 5 stories that show you in your best light. When were you at your best? What did you accomplish? It can be personal stuff you've achieved. It can be professional stuff you've achieved. But one tip I would give you on this one is, you can't anticipate every question the company is going to ask. But if you look at a job description and the things you want to look for are anytime they say proven or demonstrated. Any bullet they have that says proven strengths in dealing with ambiguity or demonstrated skills in Microsoft Excel, those two words are tip-offs. They're probably going to ask you for an example of that thing. I mean, they're basically saying, we're not going to take your word for it. You've got to give us a story. So proven and demonstrated. And then the other thing is anything that's more of a personality trait or a general strength. That's the stuff they usually ask for examples about. So if they say, must have a bachelor's degree or must know how to use Salesforce software, they're probably not going to ask you an example of that, because those are black and white things. But if they say, we want a candidate who can influence people, who can drive change, and who can collaborate across multiple departments, those are more personality traits, right, or strengths. And those are the ones, the soft skills, that are generally what they're going to ask you for examples of. So again, if you're taking any random job description, look for those things and make sure you have an example that ties to each of those personality traits or strengths that they're likely going to ask you. Okay. So again, that's just a classic thing that every interview coach would tell you to do. And a lot of Amazon, for example, is one of the famous ones that really said most of our interview is going to be having you tell us stories about various qualities you possess. Okay. Now this one's a little off the beaten path. Yes, you want to ask questions during an interview, but in a lot of interviews in the old days, you waited till the end. You sat there politely and you answered their questions and were a good little soldier until the very end. And they said, hey, Justin, do you have any questions for us? I think that's changed in recent decades. I think most hiring managers want to see engagement and curiosity throughout the interview. They don't want to sit there and robotically ask you questions any more than you want to sit there and answer them. So what you want to do is as you're interviewing, don't just focus on your own performance. Hopefully you've practiced enough where you can explain your background pretty easily. Listen to what are their issues? What are they asking about? What needs do they have? What problems are they dealing with? And don't be afraid a few times to interrupt them. Well, not interrupt them, but wait till they're done talking and show some curiosity and say, so Jennifer, you were mentioning a second ago about the need to work effectively across departments. Can you tell me a little more about that? Which departments would the person hired be having to deal with most? Are there any issues with that? Have there been some political battles or challenges in that? And every hiring manager I know says they love it when people seem to be listening, paying attention, could just ask intelligent questions back to understand what the job's about. So what I hear a lot is people come in and the employer says, I can't tell if they really wanted it. They sort of just sat there passively. They answered my questions, but there was no energy. There was no curiosity. So if you're not already doing that, you might try to inject a bit more of that into your conversation. If you get obvious signs they don't want that, like if they seem annoyed or they cut you off or something, well, back off. But if you can turn this into a problem-solving conversation, it's going to be a lot more fun for everybody than just the standard question, answer thing. So I think some people are a little shy about that. My final thought here is I think it's a really healthy mindset to go into an interview to say, my mission is not to get this job. That's out. I mean, by the time you walk into the interview, if you're worried about that, you're going to put too much pressure on yourself. Make your focus on understanding the job. I might be the right person for the job. I might not. I don't know enough about it yet. I'm going to put all my attention on understanding what this manager needs done. It's usually a lot more comfortable for people when they focus across the desk on the problems and understanding them than trying to I got to sell myself and brag and do all this stuff. Most people aren't comfortable with that. So really focus understanding what they need done and just trust if you're the right person, you'll probably get the job. But yeah, putting all that pressure on yourself usually backfires. So those are just, again, a few common things. I then have some of the, like I said, some questions in the slides when we send them to you that just make sure you've thought about these, you're ready to answer them. And again, you can Google tons of good advice on how to answer these. My Seattle U colleagues, is there any common question you would add to this? Anything you think I missed?
No, it looks like a pretty comprehensive list.
I mean, there's hundreds of others they could ask, but again, in all these years, I ask people, what did they ask you in an interview? And it's like these ones show up almost every time. So if you're not ready for strengths and weaknesses, again, you're not trying very hard because we know those softballs are probably coming. Okay. All right, then a couple more things. Extra credit. So beyond, again, the kind of time-tested things, what are a few other little wrinkles I've seen over the years that I think can really make somebody stand out? Okay, so this one's kind of funny. I see a lot of people when they're prepping for an interview, they study the job description. Like I said, they really focus on what is this job and getting ready. And sometimes they don't really look at what does this company do? Like they don't see the bigger picture of what the company's all about. And I think hiring managers can be impressed when someone seems to understand what their business is about. So let me just give you a really quick example. I had someone interviewing at Uber not long ago, the car folks. And this person had an interview coming up the next day. And I just asked him, I said, who does Uber compete with? And he thought about it for a second. And he said, Lyft and taxi cabs, I guess. And I said, well, yeah, that's true. But I said, doesn't everybody know that? I mean, I think my 8th grade son could tell me that. So I said, do you think I'd be impressed if I was a manager and all you seem to know about business is Uber or Lyft and taxi? So what I said to him is Uber has dozens of competitors. You've got all the meal delivery services now, DoorDash and all those. You've got other ride sharing companies. There's tons of them. Wouldn't you be more impressed as a manager if someone came in and said, so other than Lyft, are you folks worried about XYZ company or this company? Or how do you differentiate yourself from rideshare.com? I mean, I don't know about you, but I'd be like, wow, this person really understands my space. So I see a lot of people interviewing at companies and they don't really seem to understand what the company does. So I would do a little extra research. Who are their competitors? Any trends in their industry? What, how do they make money? Just a little bit of that goes a long way to me in showing that you've done your homework. Okay, so that's one little tip that might give you a little extra brownie points. It's so basic, but I said positive attitude earlier, which I stand by. Companies have their own problems. They don't want to hear about yours. So you want to be really positive and also respectful. And I don't want to get into the whole age game and all ageist game, but I will say that I think different generations have different attitudes about that. And I see a fair amount of my clients that I'll say tend to be younger generations that sort of have this, slouching sort of, they're just not as polite. Referring to the person, Mr., Miss, it's hard to even put my finger on it, but it just kind of comes across. They check their cell phone during the meeting, things like that. And right or wrong, I mean, you could argue the world's changed and who cares about that, but I'll speak for older hiring managers. I think really see that as a sign of disrespect and it can work against you. So hopefully I don't have to preach to any of you on this, but just really, treat that manager with respect. You want them to see you as pain relief. Like, oh, if I say yes to this person, guess what? I get to cross this off my list and they can solve those problems and I can get on to other things. So the more positive and friendly and respectful, that's going to make it easier for them to say yes. Okay. Again, hopefully don't have to say this to most of you, but you want to show that you don't know it all. I mean, as important as schooling is, it's a whole different world from what you're going to be asked to do in most jobs. So your knowledge and your education is going to be a vital underpinning, but you don't want to come in and act like, oh, I know everything about building a marketing plan if you've never done it on the job. You want to really give off this vibe as, hey, I've learned some great fundamentals at SU. I understand some really cutting edge things about marketing, but I know I also have a lot to learn. So I'd love to work for you. You tell me how you want it done. I'd be able to sponge. Again, that coachable, adaptable attitude, most managers love that because they're looking for someone who can take direction. They don't have to fight all the time about doing things a certain way. Okay, so coachability is really important. Also personality. They're going to be asking whether consciously or subconsciously, remote roles or non-remote roles, I'm going to have to be around this person a lot of my waking life, 7-8 hours in a physical site or dealing with you all the time via remote. So, don't be afraid be friendly and let some of your personality out, a little humor if it seems appropriate. I just see people who are wired so tightly and they get all weirdly formal when interviewing, and not to mix worlds, but it would be like going on a first date where the person had no personality and you ask a question, you get these really serious answers. I think most of us would be like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to have a second date. So don't be you want to be prepared and professional, but you can also let your hair down and let a little your personality come out. And then this last one is, it's a funny one, but at the end of an interview, if you think you want the job, unless something about it really turned you off, I think there's something to be said psychologically by saying something like, hey, Justin, this has been great. I really appreciate the time you spent here today. And given what you've shared about this job, I would love to work for your team. I hope you'll seriously consider me as a candidate. You don't want to ask for the job. You don't want to say, will you hire me? Or did I get the job? Or there's some higher pressure ways I've seen some books tell you to do that really, I think, are too aggressive. But I think here in Seattle, if you just tell them, hey, you sold me. This was great. I'm really excited. I know you have other good candidates, but I would sure appreciate your consideration. I'd really enjoy working with you. Again, I'm not a psychologist, but I think, if I have 3 equally qualified candidates and someone looks me in the eye and says that, I'm going to have a bias, or I'm going to hire that person just because they seem to want it more than the other people who just came in, interviewed, and left. And I really never got a sense, did I hook them? If that makes any sense. So you might try to train yourself at the end to just make that final little ask and just let them know in no uncertain terms that, yeah, I'm really, now that I know even more about this job, I'm very interested in it. 9 out of 10 people I interview never say anything like that. It's really this weird omission at the end. So this slide, like you see, just has a few little extra things I've noticed beyond the basic interview stuff that I think can tip the scales and make a difference. Okay. All right. Let's move on as I watch our clock here. So now we get to the what's new part. And again, try to leave enough question for some Q&A or time for some Q&A at the end. So what's new about interviewing? I don't think there's all that much new about the method, the questions and the way they interview. I think the biggest newness out there, as we all know, is the use of technology much more heavily than in the past. So it's very common today, these three other types of interviews: phone interviews, which aren't that new, but they're happening a lot more than they used to; virtual interviews or Zoom interviews. Zoom would love it that we call it that, right? It's like Kleenex. I mean, it's Zoom, MS Teams, any web conference interview. And then the newest kid on the block, which sends some people into just terror, is pre-recorded interviews, or also called one-way interviews. So on that third one, I don't know if any of you run into that, but that's where you don't even meet an employer or a recruiter. They just say, hey, you want to interview? We're going to send you a link. And in the next week or whatever, you just have to log onto this link and record your answers for us. And we will view them at our convenience and let you know whether or not we want you to go to the next step. So I remember about 15 years ago, I had a client who was a former Microsoft person come to me telling me about that approach. And he said in Europe, it was really popular, this kind of pre-recorded video interviewing. And I thought he was nuts. I'm like, no company's ever going to do that. You know, interviewing is about meeting people and having a conversation. I thought I should have invested it because I thought he was crazy. But here we are 10 or 15 years later, and it is growing. I don't know the exact number, but I would say I have, 10% of my clients say that that's how they're being asked to interview these days. I don't know if anyone wants to unmute their phone for a second, but maybe it's obvious, but why do you think this is catching on? Can anyone tell me why pre-recorded interviews are a thing and why they're gaining steam? Anybody? Justin, Mary Lou, do you have any thoughts on that if no one else steps up?
Well, if I had to guess, I would say it probably has something to do with initial screening, to screen out either candidates who aren't that interested in the role and don't want to take the time to do a pre-recorded interview,
Yeah.
or just somebody who's obviously not prepared or at all qualified for the role.
So I think those two things for sure. They say, oh, it's a little extra step people have to go through, so it'll screen out the looky-loos not willing to do it. You're absolutely right. There's still, though, I think the main reason doesn't quite touch on what you said. Any other thoughts or anyone else? I think there's an even more compelling reason. Go ahead.
My thought, Matt, was just hiring managers or recruiters are really busy, so they can pick and choose when they want to do this. That was the first thought that came to my mind.
It saves them time and money at the cost of really, and this is why I don't like these. I think it's basically saying, rather than schedule a meeting and talk to you, if I know I'm not going to hire you in the first 2 minutes, I don't want to have to sit around for 20 and 30 more minutes shooting the breeze and pretending you have a chance. So if you pre-record it, I can look at it in 30 seconds and go, this is not our person, and not waste any more time. Now, of course, companies try to sell it the other way. Well, this is going to give you the flexibility to do it on your schedule, so you don't have to adjust your schedule, and you can record it several times. So you get a do-over if you need it. And there's some truth to that, but let's not kid ourselves. I think most of it is we just want to blow through 10 of these versus spending time meeting people in person. So we'll see how much this trend continues to catch on. It may sort of plateau at some point. But I think that's, having talked to a lot of recruiters, I think that's what they see the advantage of it is they can just, if something turns them off or someone in the first couple of minutes doesn't look qualified, they're not on the hook to just continue that conversation. So it is what it is. Okay. So let's talk about a few tips for each of these kind of newfangled styles. So with phone interviews, again, some of these are obvious, but I still got to say them. You want to get in a place with good cell reception where it's not going to be cutting out on you a lot. And obviously you want to be in a nice quiet setting. Cars, if you have a car, sitting in your car is actually a wonderful little sound booth. I do some home music recording, And I've read articles saying that cars are so acoustically engineered to be quiet and emit road noise. They're actually a wonderful little portable recording studio. So if you have a quiet place and a place with good cell reception, that's where you want to be, obviously. You want to modulate your voice, which basically means ups and downs, lots of energy, a little extra drama, because on the phone, when you just have that one signal, just audio, people get bored really quick. We all do. So put a note in front of your face, or try to just really put some energy in your voice, modulate it, talk, excitedly, and then slow down. Takes a little practice. But again, if you're just monotone, it just really, people tune out on the phone because it's just this one little signal coming in. They don't have any body language or anything to keep them interested. So try to make an extra effort to put some energy in your voice. Nice thing about phone interviews, you get a cheat sheet. So all this practice I'm talking about, your examples, your answers to these questions. Now, you don't want to sit there and read it like a script, but the fact that you can have it around you, and if you get, stumped or forget something, you can kind of glance at it and have some notes, like a teleprompter. So that is one of the benefits of a phone interview, is that you can have all that ready. Another thing about phone is without the extra visual cues and body language, time drags on. So I try to tell people, keep your answers like half as long, maybe 2/3 as long as you would if you were sitting face to face with them. I won't speak for the Seattle University folks, but like examples on radio shows or things, I mean, we've all heard guests get asked a question and they just go on for 5 or 10 minutes, and usually we change the channel or we just go on to something else. And I've had to do a lot of media stuff and train myself. Like I was on a phone call once on some radio show, and I was talking and looked out the window and I saw a bird fly by and I completely lost my train of thought. And it was not one of my proudest moments, but I had to say to this radio, said, I have to admit it, I completely got distracted. Can you repeat the question? And they politely did. But with the phone, you got to pay so much attention because you don't have all these cues. So try to talk quickly, cut your answers down. And then this other final one, a lot of phone interviews, they don't usually tell you up front, but some phone interviews really are real interviews where all of the back and forth and conversation happens. Others are just screening calls where an HR person is going to take 15 minutes and just verify your resume. Did you go to this school? Do you have 5 years in this? And they seem very impersonal, and they are very impersonal. So if you're like wondering, what am I doing wrong? Like I try to engage and be friendly, and this automaton just is going through this list. That's normal for a screening interview. They're literally just checking boxes before they recommend that you move on to the next step. So I've had, again, some people that just thought that, I'm never going to get that interview. The person just had no response and no personality. And I go, yeah, that's probably just the drill they were following. And then the person gets the second interview. But with phone interviews, it's hard to know. Is it truly an interview or just like a resume fact-checking call? You'll see both things out there. Okay. But beyond that, there's really nothing all that different. I would say everything in my first slide still applies. Have your examples ready, the questions, be ready for those common, tell me about yourself. That's all going to apply to a phone interview as well. Okay. Now, what about Zoom interviews or web conference interviews? A little similar, a little different. Yes, you still want to have an internet connection and all that. So if you're using a tool you haven't used before, Lord knows there's tons of them out there, MS Teams and Skype and 100 others, log in a few minutes early. I mean, either practice with a friend or if you're really worried about it, but log in 5 or 10 minutes early because most of them have that ability to see your video and you get to poke around the interface, make sure you're unmuted, just to be sure you don't start the interview with all hell breaking loose and no one can hear or see you. Just be proactive. It's more important than you think to have an attractive space behind you. You want to have lighting on your face, not behind you, like witness protection. So sit next to a window or have a light of some kind behind your computer screen because you want to be front lit. You want your face and everything kind of light up. I think natural light looks a lot better. So if you can be by a window or something, I think that white light looks better than others, but we'll take what we can get. If you just have like one light bulb over your head or behind you, as we've all seen, it's hard to see them. It just doesn't look good. So take an extra step on that. You have a really non-cluttered background. Don't have laundry piles behind you or all that stuff. And as you can see on mine, I think the blur features on these tools are really handy. That just kind of put the focus on you and not completely eliminate, but soften the background just so you don't have to be quite as paranoid about that empty dish or something. So I really like the blur backgrounds myself. At least from the waist up, you want to look the part. So that doesn't mean a full suit and all that, but look professional, whatever you think's appropriate. A button-down shirt, or for women, something you would wear, to the office. Again, you don't want to be in your t-shirt or sweatshirt. You don't want to look sloppy. So whatever you have to do to kind of put on the attire, it does count. People do notice it. Just because we're all here from COVID doesn't mean we get to take business calls in our pajamas. I mean, you got to do better than that. So just pay a little extra attention to that. Posture is also important, and I'm trying to practice it myself. Sit up straight. It helps you project energy. If I kind of sit down on my chair like this, I mean, we can't put our finger on it, but it loses confidence and it loses power. So sit up straight, try to have your camera roughly level with your face or just a level above. I've seen some people where it's like their camera's way up shooting down and you can only kind of see the top of their head. Again, basic stuff, but it does make a difference. Okay, if you have roommates or family or pets, do whatever you can to get them to bug off while you're interviewing. It's not the end of the world if your cat jumps. Usually you have a good laugh if your cat jumps on your lap, but if you can avoid it, just tell people, put a sign on the door, studio in session, please don't barge in, kind of thing. Okay, and then again, you can also have notes for a web conference interview, but you can't sit there and look at them too often or it will seem forced or distracting. So I could have my things sitting around me, and once in a blue moon, I could kind of peek over, or geez, I forgot my example. But if you do that too much, the interview can tell you're losing eye contact. So have them, but just don't rely on them or sit there and read them, or that will seem quite weird. Okay. So similar to phone interview, but a few extra things, and mostly it's about the visuals and the space you're interviewing in, and just recognizing that kind of stuff does make a difference, even if it's subconscious. People like, did that person make a winning impression or not? Okay, and then the last key slide is about those pre-recorded or one-way interviews that many people get stage fright and they hate them, and I'm not a big fan of them either, but if you get hit with one, you don't have a choice. You got to do it. So the first thing is, a lot of them do come with instructions. Here's how it's going to work. Here's how you log in. Here's how many attempts you get to answer each question, how much time you have. Obviously, read through those in detail so you understand exactly how it's going to work. And if you have any questions, just email the recruiter back and say, hey, can you clarify this for me? Because they're trying to help you succeed. They're going to give you a sheet that generally, and they know most people haven't done these before. So they're going to try to help you, but don't try to assemble the furniture without reading the instructions. Make sure you look at them first. All the same stuff I just said about your space, because you're going to be filming and recording this. So again, the dress code, the noise, the lighting, all the same stuff applies for these kind of interviews. If they give you questions, a lot of times with these kind of interviews, because they know they're putting you on the spot, they will tell you, here's what you're going to be asked. Here's our 5 questions or 7 questions. So obviously, if they tell you what to expect, there's even less excuse not to really work on those, practice them until they're smooth ahead of time. If they don't tell you what they're going to ask, just fall back on the classic ones I had earlier. But generally for these kind of interviews, they usually tell you in advance, here's the script. So you get a little extra ability to prep for it. Okay, the responses are timed. Now that depends on the question, and each company is different, but they might say you have 2 minutes to tell us your greatest strength, 3 minutes to tell us about yourself, 1 minute to tell us whatever, how much money you're looking for. So obviously you don't want to get cut off and run out of time. If you think that's a problem for you, if you tend to ramble or get nervous, then that's where prepping in advance and timing yourself, just have your phone and put your timer on and work on that darn answer and crunch it down and let go of the non-critical stuff until you can hit that time limit. They usually give you 2 or 3 attempts. You can re-record it. So if you blow it, you can try it. Oh, I think that's my last one. If you blow it, you can always try again, but if you keep going long 3 times, you may be out of luck. So if you think that's an issue, work in advance, time yourself. You'll see a lot of improvement in a hurry if you do that kind of practice. Holy cow, I can't believe I just talked 5 minutes. It felt like 2, but your phone is telling you it was just, it was 5. So that's how you really improve on that score. Okay, so we have some old stuff, some classics. We have a few new wrinkles for some of the new tech-enabled interviews. It's certainly not everything one could possibly say about that subject, so get your questions ready. Feel free to ask them. And one last time, let me just ask the Seattle U staff, anything you think I missed, anything you'd add to what you saw there that I overlooked or that you coach people on?
That hits it. That was great. Thanks, Matt.
I'd agree with most of those. Okay. Anything else, Mary Lou or Megan or anything? All good?
Yeah, really good, Matt. Thank you.
Okay. So what are we at? 1:18. So we got 12 or so minutes. I'm all yours. What questions? You can either type them in the chat box or, I'm just seeing there are some in there. Chat them or we can unmute. So let me work through the chat screen real quick, see what's in there. I wasn't paying attention to that as we talked here. Okay, hold on a second. Let me go back to the start. Okay, so going way back to my start, once you do that search, I think Anthony meant the LinkedIn search, what should you do? So once you find a company with 140,000 companies, you would probably check their job board, see if they happen to have something that fits you. And assuming they don't, I would look on LinkedIn. Is there a recruiter or a human resource person or a friend of a friend you have at that company? And just reach out and tell them, hey, I'm really interested in jobs at this company. Would love to chat with someone about the possibilities. Do you anticipate any hiring in the coming months? So really, Anthony, the key is when you find a company, nothing is going to happen unless you try some form of outreach. So if they have a job, apply to it. But in most cases, you're looking for, again, HR, recruiting, or a friend of a friend, and just reaching out and saying, I'd love to work for you folks. Can you tell me a little more about the company? I'm not saying that's going to work every time. It may only get you, 1 out of 5 times does anyone even return your call, but numbers count. And if 1 out of 5 respond back, that may be the one you need to get that job. So once you find the companies, engage them in one of those methods. Okay. Someone asked for my email address. I'll just type it here so you have it. Matt@career-horizons.com, and that's my website as well. So I'll put that in the chat. So if anyone wants it. What else do we have? How much money you're looking for question. I believe others disagree. I think you've got to meet them halfway. I don't think you should refuse to answer the question about salary. A lot of books tell you to avoid it or try to turn it back on the employer. Like, well, how much are you looking to pay? And I just don't think that's a good idea, because every recruiter, it drives them nuts. They know that trick. It makes you seem like you're playing games. So what I would say on money is I would do the research I mentioned, Glassdoor, pay scale, salary, talk to people in the field. And if someone says, hey, Matt, how much money are you looking for? I would say, hey, that's a fair question. The opportunity I'm looking for is not just about the money. I'm looking for other factors, benefits, upside potential, other things are important to me. But given my background and similar jobs I've seen out there, I think the ballpark I'd be targeting would be, and give them like a $20,000 range, 60 to 80,000 or 100 to 120,000, just based on the exact job. Again, the benefits, the long-term potential and other factors. So you're giving them something to work with. You're not locking into a number, but they're just trying to do their job and go, should I keep talking to this person? Or are they so high or so low, we're just never gonna come together. So I don't believe you should avoid that question or bypass. I think they'll just mark you down for not following directions. Give them a nice, rough, big answer based on that research. And generally, I think that gets the job done. Okay. How do I deal with questions related to industry switch? Now, if we're specifically talking about interviewing, that is a tough question that you want to anticipate. Hey, this is an issue they might ask me. The first thing I would say, Suganda, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, is recognize they wouldn't be interviewing you most likely if they thought you couldn't do the job, or like if you had to have experience in their industry Why did they invite you in? So recognize there is room. They're looking for help. So if they ask you about industry switch, I would first embrace the question. Don't fight it. Hey, that's a great question. Let's talk about that. Or I was assuming you'd probably want to know the answer to that. Like, seem really open to talking about it, so it doesn't seem like you're trying to hide something. And then just walk them through and say, well, the reason, whatever the real reason is, after 10 years in healthcare, I was ready for a new challenge. I felt I had accomplished most of what I wanted to do. So I did some homework and I decided I really want to be in your industry now, or whatever the truth is. And then the main thing you want to do is any correlations you can make between your old industry and the new industry. So you could, I'm just making this up, but you could say, but in healthcare, I had to deal with a lot of software systems. We were tracking all kinds of patient data, running analytics. So that's why I think making the jump now here to a tech company would actually be very comfortable for me, because I was really on the data side of healthcare. Or you're trying to draw that bridge between your old world and the new world. If there's absolutely no correlation, then there's not much you can do. But if you think in advance, what if they ask me that? How can I explain my story? How can I be really positive? And how can I show them our industries are not as far apart as they may have thought? Like, I'm working with a real estate agent right now looking to change careers. And what we're trying to do is frame her real estate work from a project management standpoint. Every day I have to juggle 100 details, compliance issues, documentation. I have to get all these stakeholders, contractors, clients. I'm not saying, it's the same as being a project manager, but it's going to help that interviewer see her in that light much more than if he just says, yeah, I was a real estate agent. Now I want to be a project manager, with no attempt to tell that story. So you just got to anticipate it and see what you can come up with. Okay. Breaks in career. Oh, okay.
Thanks, man.
Oh, there you are. Okay. Did you have a question, or were you just saying thank you?
No, this was my question. So yeah, I kind of got it. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, good deal. Breaks in career, it depends. If they're really short breaks, like less than a year, they're probably not even going to ask you about them. If they're longer, you've got to give them an explanation very confidently. I mean, again, every situation is different. What I would not get into is things like healthcare issues or long periods of unemployment, anything that could be perceived as negative, even if it's reality. Just talk about, oh, I wanted to take some time off after working for a number of years, or I took a break to get more schooling and education. It really is going to depend, but you would want to have the most positive, confident answer to that. Because yeah, if it's longer than a year or so, they're going to wonder what you were doing. So if anyone has a specific, like, unique issue there, you could always email me. I can give you some more specific thoughts, but generally just don't get into stuff like, again, health issues. I've had people coming out of prison, right? Who, that's why they had a break in their career. They're in jail, and we had to, find ways to spin that. What else do we have? Testing candidate behaviors in the interview. Casey, I haven't seen much of that. If you're talking about, like, literally putting you in a situation and role playing to see how you react to it. If you, oh, I'm gonna intentionally ask you a question like, I'm not gonna hire with you. How do you feel about that? Just to test how you do under stress or something. Thankfully, that kind of interviewing is extremely rare. I don't see that happening very often. I suppose it could. All I could tell you on that is, if you think someone is intentionally, like, hitting you with really tough questions, recognize it's a test and don't lose your cool. Smile, give your best answer, think on your feet. Don't let them get under your skin, because that's what they're trying to do. They're not looking for the right answer. They're looking to see how you think. Let's say they ask you, how would you move Mount Fuji from one place? That's, again, you don't know the answer. I don't know the answer, but just thoughtfully sit back, think about it, and walk them through your problem solving process. That's the few that do that. That's kind of what they're looking for. Can you think things rationally and keep a calm head on your shoulders? Okay, hopefully we're getting to the end here. Aren't these pre-recorded questions already rehearsed not the best way to choose? That's a great question. Do I think that's the best way? Well, no, because you're saying if I give you the questions in advance, couldn't anyone just give me a line of BS and tell me something, even if it's not true? Well, yes, I think they recognize that's possible. But as we said earlier, they are so sold on the convenience and not wasting time. I think they're willing to make that trade-off. They also probably assume most people are not good enough actors and actresses to completely fool them and do this Hollywood production that has no basis in the truth. So they might admit it is not the absolute best way as a really back and forth interview, but I think the trade-offs to them of time and money are worth it, which is why it's catching on a bit. That's my feeling, at least.
Thank you,
Okay,
Matt.
I think we've got, I've got one other last one. Anthony, you asked about introverts and networking. Now that's a separate topic from interviewing. Go ahead and email me on that one and I'll point you to some resources because I do have something to say about that, but that's, since it's not interviewing, we won't address that here. Justin, you want to take it away?
I do. Thanks, Matt. Again, thank you so much for doing this. This is great insight. We always appreciate having you come and share what's going on out there. And students, I know Matt dropped his the link to his website, but I also wanted to drop a link to his blog because his blog is fantastic and he puts some really good career advice in there. So I would definitely recommend checking that every once in a while. Hold on, I sent that actually to Mary Lou. Let's send it to everybody. There you go. And just as a reminder, we do have some other upcoming events next week on, what is the date? On the 25th, we have a workshop called Internships Insight. Get it, Internships Insight. That's going to be on a panel of students, both grad and undergrad, who have had internships, and they're going to share their best tips for finding internships and also being successful in internships. Speaking of internships, we have a career and internship fair coming up. That's going to be February 10th. It'll be virtual via handshake like our last several have been. And we also have mock interviews with employers coming up on February 17th, as well as Albert's Career Night, which is our largest undergrad specific networking event. That'll be on February 23rd, and we're still kind of working out whether that's going to be in person or virtual. Otherwise, thank you students for coming to this. Hopefully you found it as helpful and beneficial as I think I did and the APC team did. And again, thank you, Matt. We really appreciate you taking the time out to come and talk to us today.